Very much welcome to this interactive session on capacity for governing water security, risk, and uncertainty. I think we have ahead of us today a very interesting agenda with several presentations, discussions, breakout groups, and panel debates. The session is convened by Stockholm International Water Institute, CB, IHE Delft, and UNEP's program for building capacity within the water sector, CapNet. It is supported by the CEDA-funded Go Water program, building governance capacity for improved water security. It's a program that aims to strengthen water governance capacities among key government water organizations and works in 6 different countries around the world. Well then, what is the purpose we are gathering here today? Why are we organizing this workshop? The workshop is set against the backdrop of increasing water insecurity around the world. This summer, for example, we've had lots of news of floodings here in Europe, for example, but also in other places of the world. So it's clear that floods and droughts are on the increase, and many people around the world are facing increasing water insecurities. It also a fact that the water resources data and the extrapolation of historical hydrological trends and models is no longer sufficient. So we cannot rely on the knowledge we have, the historical knowledge, but we also need to try to look into the future in one way or the other. A third challenge is the mounting complexity of water governance and the number of challenges that persist across multiple sectors and different types of sustainable development targets. Just to mention a few sectors where the role of water plays out strongly is agriculture, energy, and manufacturing industry. As just a few examples. We also know that human and institutional capacities play really important key roles for the performance of water organizations and how effective they can be in their contribution to water security. It is against this backdrop we have developed the aim of this workshop, which is very much to promote learning and experience sharing among water decision makers and practitioners on advancing governance capacity development, both on the what and how, basically with a view to improve water security. What do we then mean by water governance and security? There's, of course, a whole debate on governance and water security. We will not refer to that here, but just very briefly try to capture how we see water governance and water security. Governance is very much about how we as individuals and as a society use and allocate the common and shared resource and the social and economic benefits that derive from it. It's also about politics, power, and decision-making on who gets what water, when, and how. We also see governance as the quality of different types of institutions and the interactions between actors in the range of political, social, economic, and administrative systems. We really do work on governance as a means to an end, and where we see governance playing a very critical role to achieve water security. We see water security in a very broad sense that links to, for example, human security, food security, and energy security, just to mention a few. And where we see security in the water area as relying on availability of acceptable quantity and quality of water for health, livelihoods, and production, and of course coupled with an acceptable level of water-related risks. This is a definition that also includes risks related to floods and droughts, as well as sustainable ecosystems. Before we continue with the program, just some housekeeping rules. The session will be recorded, and of course, we will share the recording on the World Water Week platform and also other platforms as appropriate. Please keep Zoom chat turned off, and please use the chat on the World Water Week platform. So that's where we really will be able to check the chats and your questions. Also, if you have any questions to speakers, panelists, the organizers, please also write them down in the chat. And also closed capture will be enabled, and please turn it on if required. I think with that, I very much welcome you to this session and turn over to you, Lotten, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Håkan. So we would like to get an idea of who we have here in the audience. So we have 3 quick questions for you. I would like you to press the poll button on your screen, and let's go to the first question. So, where do you live? Please enter your answer. Okay, let's look at the result. Okay, it seems like a majority come from Europe. We also have a representation from North America, Africa, Asia, yeah, basically all continents except Australia. Okay, thanks for your answer. Let's go to the second question. So, what type of institution do you work for? Please enter your answer. Okay, let's have a look at the result. Okay, so it seems like we have many different institutions. Majority are a development partner, no one from the private sector, but we have representation from the academia, service provider, policymakers. Good, thank you. And finally, let's go to the last question, which links to the theme of this session today. According to you, what are the top 3 capacities to respond to uncertainty? The top 3 capacities, according to you. So please make your choice. Okay, let's see what we got there. Okay, interesting. So, policy development, capacity development, regulation. Yeah, interesting. We have different answers, but it seems like planning is one of the main capacities, and also financing and coordination and policy development. Interesting. Let's see what we will think after this session in 2 hours, if anything has changed. Thank you for your answers. I would now like to hand over to James Layton, who will introduce our keynote speakers. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Håkan, and thank you, Lotten. Hello, my name is James Layton, and I will be facilitating the coming 30 minutes in which we will have 2 keynote speakers. Andrew Warren will address adaptive planning, and Dr. Mohammad Wasim Iqbal will present water governance in practice from understanding to functioning. So for you all participants to this session, of course, as Hokyan said, please use the chat of the World Water Week platform for your questions and not the Zoom platform. And if you have specific questions to the speakers, please mention that because we will take the questions after the two presentations. But so now, let me introduce to you the first speaker, Andrew Warren. Andrew works at Deltares. He is an IWRM and climate change adaptation expert. Andrew develops and applies methodologies for decision-making under deep uncertainty. The aim of his work is to incorporate present and future uncertainties into planning processes. So Andrew, thank you for sharing your experience and expertise with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, James. Just waiting for my slides to come up. Okay, so good morning, everyone, or good day, everyone, wherever you may be. Today, I'm going to be talking about adaptive planning under deep uncertainty, and in particular, what's needed to implement what we call adaptation pathways in practice. And I'm going to start with a statement. Next slide, please. Under deep uncertainty, decision makers need to aim for robust plans that can be adapted over time. So what this essentially means, and as the introduction sort of spoke to, we now need to plan for the unknown. And this is very different to how we've been planning up until now, where we've been able to base our plans on the historical record and so forth. But when we're talking about deep uncertainty, we're talking about aspects about which we know we don't know, but we don't yet know what we don't know. And climate change is a classic example in this, where we're still learning about the potential phenomena and its impacts. For example, things like the Gulf Stream weakening. Will any of the infrastructure that we put in place now, with a potentially long lifespan, still be appropriate in the future to deal with these types of phenomena? So in other words, we need our plans that can adapt to the conditions as they emerge, but then also which fulfill our planning objectives, whatever conditions do emerge. And that's why we need these adaptive plans, because we still need to take decisions, because decision paralysis also is undesirable. So the question is, how do we take these decisions? Next slide, please. And this is where at Deltares, we've developed a methodology called Dynamic Adaptive Policy Pathways. And it's one of a family of bottom-up approaches to decision-making under deep uncertainty. But it's a systematic analytical adaptive planning framework to consider decision-making through time. So what decision do I need to take now to meet some short-term goals? But also, what decisions do I leave open for the future once my present decision reaches its limits? It's a process that's stakeholder driven, and in doing so, it's able to set integrated planning objectives and incorporate multiple perspectives. And it considers a wide range of plausible futures. So instead of planning for a single specific set of conditions or a single scenario, rather it's trying to make our plans more scenario independent and planning for a range of potential eventualities. And another key element of the DAPP approach is this idea of monitoring the plan and iterating, updating the plan periodically as required. And the output of the plan is what's termed it's the adaptive plan, but as part of that, we have adaptation pathways, an example of which is on the right. And that's represented as a metro map and indicates where we have flexibility in our plans, where perhaps we might end up in risky lock-ins, how robust our plans are, but essentially, how can our plan continue to meet our objectives as the conditions change? Next slide, please. But what happens once you have that plan? Because from that the entry poll that we just ran, we heard that people don't feel that we need to build our adaptive planning capacity, and that's probably true. I think I would agree with that. What happens once you have it? How do you implement this plan? Next slide, please. Now, in implementing adaptive planning, we at Deltares, we focus much more on the technical side of things. So we really see three capacities that need to be improved to be able to implement these types of plans more effectively. The first is adaptive monitoring to tell us when to implement or adjust the plan. The second is adaptive governance to provide the necessarily enabling conditions to coordinate, manage, and implement the plan. And finally, we need adaptive financing to be able to provide the necessary financing certainty and flexibility to pay for any interventions. Next slide, please. To go into each of those in slightly more detail, firstly, adaptive monitoring. The key thing is, when it comes to an adaptive plan, is we need to be able to monitor signals in order to get information in time that we're about to reach an adaptation threshold or an adaptation tipping point. So in other words, when our existing policy settings are no longer going to be effective, we want to know in time to be able to implement the next action before it is needed. And to do that, we need signals. And these signals, they need to be measurable, they need to be timely, they need to be reliable, they also need to be credible and legitimate. And if they exhibit these characteristics, then we can ensure that we will be able to be informed sufficiently and in time, and are able to act on that information when it arrives. You know, that information is respected. So, and signals can be wide-ranging. They can be either related to the performance indicator of our policies, so a flood level or avoided damages or whatever it may be, or it can be other parameters in the environment, and that could be biophysical or socioeconomic, and indicate that changing conditions are approaching. Next slide, please. But good signals can be hard to find. So here is on your screen is an example of two alternative signals to provide an indication of the degree of the fact that peak discharges might be increasing, the incidence of peak discharge. Now we can see that the bottom signal is much stronger, much clearer, that we've entered into the blue scenario rather than the signal on top. So there's quite a lot of work that needs to go into finding the most appropriate signals. And obviously we need a lot of modeling and technical capacity to be able to deliver those capabilities. Next slide, please. But in addition to adaptive monitoring and signaling, we also need adaptive governance. And the primary purpose of adaptive governance is really to mainstream adaptive planning within our implementation processes. And it's really to try and counter this tendency towards short-termism within our existing institutions and be able to integrate the complexity. So we need new institutional arrangements. We need to be able to clarify who is responsible for what, because adaptation is no longer a single sector, but rather something that is spread across multiple sectors. That can be aided by enabling legislation, preferably non-partisan legislation to enshrine long-termism in law. And then there's obviously, again, this central role of effective multi-stakeholder engagement and management in these planning and implementation processes. So we need new skills in terms of coordination and integrating multiple perspectives and integrating stakeholders into the process of not only planning, but also implementation. We need process managers and these types of experts as well. When it comes to adaptive finance, we need to be thinking about how can we finance the uncertainty? And here we need flexible financing. And so there's new models of financing that are being looked into now, things like blended finance or what's termed mosaic projects, where we're looking at incorporating financing from a range of sources, public sources, private sources, carbon offsets, sustainable forestry, water credits, all these sorts of things can diversify the revenue stream and mean that a project can be considered much more bankable than otherwise would be the case, given the uncertainty. And given that we're looking at these new financing mechanisms, we then also need to develop new public procurement and contracting practices to deal with the complexity. Next slide, thanks. And that's where I'll end for now, because I know I'm nearly up against my time. But in summary, We know that our traditional planning approaches are no longer fit for purpose and they need to be more adaptive. DAPP offers a way to increase the adaptive nature of our plans. And then once we get to the phase of trying to implement DAPP in practice, Deltaris has identified 3 key capacities that need to be strengthened: monitoring, governance, and also financing. Thanks for that, and I look forward to the following question and answer session. Back to you, James.
Thank you very much, Warren, and well done for keeping to the time. Thank you so much. And so let me now introduce to you Dr. Mohammed Wassim Iqbal. Dr. Wassim, I think still, like we can say, still is the director of Afghanistan National Water and Environmental Research Center, even though the Taliban deactivated all the governmental institutions, hence also his center. Wassim fled Kabul one day before the Taliban entered into the capital, and he is joining this session from Istanbul in Turkey. So Wassim, well, first, our thoughts are with your fellow citizen, and we are so happy to have you with us. The floor is yours. Please unmute yourself, Wassim. You are still muted.
Good day, everyone. I'm going to present our research assessing the water governance practices in Afghanistan from understanding to functioning, which was performed by me and my team in Afghanistan National Water and Environmental Research Center. Next slide, please. While the water governance principles were developed in the other parts of the world, limited knowledge existed among the decision makers in Afghanistan after 2001. But after 2001, the democracy time in Afghanistan, the donors and the government believed in bringing water governance system and practices in Afghanistan because they wanted to diminish the weakness which was caused by the continued war and drought in Afghanistan. The first time water governance was implemented in 2004 through the European Union in a water governance project in Amur River Basin, and it led to adoption of water governance and RWN principles in the water law of Afghanistan in 2009. Next slide, please. The objective of this research was to investigate the level of implementation, the efficiency, strengths, and the weakness points of the existing water governance system in Afghanistan through applying the OECD water governance indicators. Next slide, please. The methodology of this research used the OECD governance principles, 12 principles and 36 indicators. We had two kinds of data. One was desk review. We reviewed 64 legislative documents and papers relevant to the water management and water governance issues. The other part was the focus discussion group, which was happened in the research center, and also interview with the experts. We analyzed the data by using the OECD principles. And the output of this research was to understand the level of implementation, efficiency, strengths, and weakness of water governance in Afghanistan. And also, one outcome was assessing the future direction of the water governance system in Afghanistan. And in the final stage, we proposed a basis for a more informed and future-oriented policy making for the decision makers in Afghanistan. Next slide. This is the result which we got from the interview. While we are going to consider the OECD principle, we have to consider 5 stages. Stage 1 means not in place. It means doesn't exist. Stage 2 is in development. 3 is in place or exists but not implemented. Stage 4 is exist but partly implemented. And stage 5, it is the best stage for a water governance principle. It is in place, it means exist and also functioning properly. While we consider the principles, the first principle show that the principle one, which is role and responsibility, is in the development process or in the development stage. The second principle also is in development stage. The third principle also in development stage. The fourth principle is also in development stage, and the fifth principle also in development stage. While we come to the sixth principle of the water governance, we see that this principle does not exist at all. The seventh principle is also in the development stage. The eighth principle, it also does not exist. The ninth principle is in development process. The 10th principle in development stage. The 11th and the 12th principles, we see that they are also, these principles do not exist at all in Afghanistan. Next slide, please. Okay, when we come to the details of these principles, from our document review, we see that the first principle, for example, the role and responsibility, although there are some good document, legislative document, the water law, there are lots of increasement and progress in this principle, but the problem is the implementation. The second principle also, we see that in the second principle, there is IWRM principles, but the problem is the progress. When we asked from the interviews, they told us only 5% of the IWRM is probably implemented in Afghanistan. When we come to the third principle, we see that there are cross-sector policies on the paper, but the problem is, again, the implementation of these cross-sector policies. When we see the fourth principle, which is about the capacity building, we see that there are a number of capacity building programs. I myself witnessed a lot of programs from the donors, from the government, but the problem was the poor hiring mechanism. When we come to the fifth principle, which is about the data and information, we see this principle has lots of problems. There are shortages of water-related data system which have negative impact on decision making. The most challenging principle is the financing in Afghanistan. No framework for financial mechanism and no revenue collection mechanism. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all these principles, we see some of them, although they exist, but the problem is the implementation stage. Next slide, please. Okay, when we conclude, the research showed that all the principles, all 12 principles of the water governance based on the OECD are in development or do not exist. There are law and regulation, but they are only on the paper. The implementation is a big problem. Why could not be implemented? Weak cooperation between the key water-related authorities, low political will, security, and corruption were the main problems. But we saw during 2 decades, from 2001 to 2021, there are some progress like water law, IWRM policies, some cross-sectoral currency. We witnessed that some progress came to the water governance in Afghanistan. We propose applying water governance principles in Afghanistan. They are very useful if they are applied for better water management and proper implementation of newly developed policies. What I'm going to say that there are 3 time periods in the history of the water governance of Afghanistan. 1919 to 1981, it is the kingdom time. It was the I can say that the fruitful time for the water management and water governance in the history of Afghanistan. From 1981 to 2001 was the Taliban regime and the national war. After 21 to 2021, August 2021, I can say it was the democracy time in Afghanistan, and we witnessed lots of advancement. I will add another time period in the history of Afghanistan. This is after August 2021, 2021, and I can say that the all achievements of the 20 years in Afghanistan will be completely lost. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Wasim. Thank you very much. Now we have 10 minutes to respond to some questions. So please type your questions in the chat box of the World Water Week platform. I have first two questions for you, Andrew, and they relate, in fact, to the adaptive planning. So, does it work as a decision-making support system? This is the first question. And the second one is, what level of planning is accommodated in this adaptive planning, and by who?
Yeah, thanks for those questions, James. And I see that it was Caroline who posed them. So thank you, Caroline. Two excellent questions. The thing about, for the first question, the thing about DAPP is it's not so much a decision support system as a decision-making framework. So within that framework, you obviously need to incorporate analytical methodologies and assessment methodologies, which can use models, decision support systems, and so on and so forth. So it's a flexible framework where you can use whatever assessment tools you have at your disposal to be able to step through the process, essentially. So, for example, if I think of the adaptive planning work that we've done together in Bangladesh with the Bangladeshi government, we've been building what we call a meta model, or a strategic assessment tool, which is able to test multiple scenarios and multiple different types of interventions and look at the impacts of those on a range of performance indicators. So the decision support system is, if you like, the meta model. Well, and that is able to then support the decision-making process, which conforms with the DAPP framework, if you will. In terms of your second question, to what level of planning is accommodated within DAPP, again, I go back to its flexibility. So planning processes are iterative. It's not as if we just do the planning once and everything is perfect and set it and forget it. That's not how it works. So it's an iterative process, both well, within each individual planning process, but then also that is reviewed and revisited in years at certain times in the future as well. But the iterative nature means that you can undertake DAPP at different levels of analysis. So we would always start with a very quick scan type approach, where you're looking at narrative assessments, narrative scenarios, what might happen, what are the challenges we're looking at, what are the objectives we're concerned with, what potential options do we have available to us, and looking at doing that in a very sort of more qualitative way. Then once you have that to provide the broad parameters for your analysis, you can take it to the next level of analysis. Start to introduce some quantitative information from existing reports, from existing models, from expert judgment, whatever it may be, and then redo the assessment and come up with a slightly more refined plan. And then if you need to take it to the next level, you can then deepen that analysis further with perhaps specialized modeling tools, and so on and so forth. But the approach itself is flexible. It's more to create we always talk about trying to create pathways thinking and build pathways thinking into all of our processes, rather than thinking of it as an individual process or an individual product that is produced at the end of the process. So hopefully that answers your question.
And the participants to the process, who is taking the lead, and the different participants that contribute, I assume there is also flexibility in that one.
Absolutely. I mean, we would, it's context specific, right, yeah. James? So sound stakeholder engagement and management is imperative to the approach. So in setting the objectives and guiding the analysis, we're really trying to put the power, if you will, or the decision-making responsibility in the hands of of the stakeholders throughout the process, rather than the technical experts who are merely there to just guide the process and provide some technical input to make sure things remain scientifically sound and technically sound as we go through the process.
Thank you, Andrew. Also to you, Wasim, two questions. A question about the challenges in coordination among the key stakeholder actors, and some ideas how you would build governance.
You mean actually the coordination challenge is a big challenge in Afghanistan, you know, well, because we had like regulatory framework, but the problem was that the simultaneous work used to be done by different ministries. It means, for example, Ministry of Water used to do similar task as which was going to be implemented and done by Ministry of Irrigation and Agriculture. And what was the second question? I could not get it.
Yeah, how do you have some ideas how to build governance in complex context like Afghanistan?
Actually, in 2019, we proposed like the Supreme Council of the Water and Land and Environment. It was directed by President Ashraf Ghani, but you know, unfortunately, all these things stopped. As I mentioned, I don't think even we can go through the basic water governance indicators in Afghanistan, unfortunately. One thing I should note that from 2015 to 2021, we developed 28 legislative documents for the data and information, for the financing, for the role and responsibility, for all these principles, water governance principles. But they were developed, but we were not successful to implement. We were going to shift to the development to the implementation stage, and you know that what happened in Afghanistan. I don't know what will be the future of the water management and water governance in Afghanistan. We had good time. These 2 decades were fruitful in Afghanistan. Lots of things, lots of new things, especially the IWRM principles came to the context of the water management in Afghanistan. But there is a big uncertainty now. No one knows what will happen.
Yeah. But there is one question from Carlos that is also in the chat. Despite all our efforts in different approaches that we propose, it seems water governance at national, subnational level are still weak. What could be the new paradigm to put water governance at the center to reach water security? I suppose that this is more in a context where, water governance is weak. Would you have any ideas that you could propose, Wasim? Do you think of a new paradigm?
Actually, for good water governance principle,
Wasim?
yes,
hello? Go ahead.
Sorry for disconnection. For a good water governance practices, as I propose in the context of Afghanistan, the best way is to implement 12 principles and 36 indicators from the development stage to proper implemented stage. This is so how to create the environment and the condition to implement these things. This need, you know, a proper mechanism, financing, data, role and responsibility. There are lots of things to be considered. In the context of Afghanistan, I think countries like Afghanistan, it would be very difficult, and it takes, I think, 20 or 30 years time to be successful in implementation of such kind of things. It means that it is not possible.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Wasim. We don't have time to take more questions live. We will take them into the chat box themselves. So for the ones that have posted questions, they will get a response by Andrew and Wasim directly into the chat. For me now, it's my time to close this small part of the session and to hand over to Cristina Lopez. Cristina, I pass on the relay button to you.
Thank you, James, and also to our speakers. Hello, everyone. I'm Cristina Lopez, and I'll be facilitating the next 30 minutes of presentations. For the next section of our program, we will be delving more into this thing of capacity within the water sector with two presentations that will provide different perspectives on the subject. And afterwards, we will have some time for Q&A with both speakers, as we did in our last section. So please remember to share your questions and thoughts via the pathable chat function, so not on Zoom, and please specify the speaker you're directing your question to, so I can moderate at the end and we can discuss it in our Q&A part. Now I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker of this section, Magnus Hagelstein. He is a researcher, a teacher, and a director of the Disaster Risk Management and Climate Change Adaptation Master's Program at Lund University since 2012. He has worked 12 years for the Swedish governmental agency in various countries overseas and on humanitarian relief, preparedness, and capacity development. On his presentation, Magnus will be sharing with us different perspectives and roles in capacity development and the challenge and opportunities that come with as well. The floor is yours, Magnus.
Thank you, Cristina. Ladies, gentlemen, colleagues, and friends, my name is Magnus Hagelstein. I'm a pre-academic and work at Lund University, Division of Risk Management and Societal Safety, where I combine theory and practice. My research focuses on capacity development for disaster risk reduction, and I am the coordinator for the capacity development course. My interest for capacity development started in 2003, nearly 20 years ago, when I was working in Afghanistan for the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan with disaster management. I try to go on a mission every year to have one foot in practice. The purpose of this study is to explore the perspectives of a local partner, or what we call the internal partner, to understand their perspectives on challenges and possible solutions in capacity development. Here, the internal partner is the one that is going to develop their capacities together with an external partner that support that process. We interviewed 27 participants in 5 countries in Southern Africa: Botswana, Mozambique, Seychelles, Tanzania, and Zambia. The 5 countries were purposefully selected to include countries with different levels of development. Seychelles on the border of very high human development, and Mozambique being one of the least developed countries, and Botswana, Zambia, and Tanzania in between. The participants had diverse backgrounds: directors, deputy directors, head of departments, divisions, or units, program officers, national coordinators, focal points, advisors, or experts at various governmental organizations and committees. It is interesting to note that the participants' perceptions from the 5 countries are aligned, and no difference between the countries are possible to distinguish, regardless of the vast differences in context. From the results, we identified 7 project failures, the importance of flexible and adaptive roles in capacity development, and 3 requisite types of capacity. 7 different types of failures were identified, compiled in one framework. The failures can be combined in numerous ways, and each of them undermines the effectiveness of capacity development. The first step: no capacity assessment. A capacity assessment is not considered. The external partner comes with their own knowledge and expertise without contextualizing it to the specific circumstances, existing structures, and capacities. Sometimes due to short-time restrictions, lack of resources, and funding. External partners focus too much on their expertise, interests, and priorities, and are therefore blind to the actual problems. An expert blind spot. That is undermining their ability to understand or appreciate local context, knowledge, capacities, and needs. The second step, external partner develops project plan. In many projects, the external partner comes with their own agenda and has already assigned a project proposal. Even when external partners perform a capacity assessment, the results show that they come with their agenda, conditions, predefined project proposal, and fixed project frames, without contextualizing it to the local circumstances. The projects come with conditions, which generates an intense need for control, erosion of flexibility, and a misguided accountability towards the donors instead of the internal partner. Even when donors give flexibility, it is not trickled down along the aid chain, according to a result in a forthcoming article. Step 3, no time to implement. There is an issue of a lack of actual implementation in the projects. The results clearly indicate a frustration regarding the number of assessments conducted and plans developed, with no substantial activities implemented afterwards. People are tired of repeated assessments with no tangible results. This step is in conflict with step 1. Either we have no capacity assessment or too much. Step 4, only ad hoc training. It is apparent from the results that many capacity development projects focus overwhelmingly on short technical training activities on individual level. For example, 1 or 2 day or maybe 1 week workshops. These short-term trainings have limited impact and are delivered in an ad hoc manner, according to the participants. One participant said, "There are too many short-term projects and they are not responding to a bigger national objective. There is a need to have a system perspective and not only focus on individuals. These trainings are separated from the academic systems in the study countries, which is a missed opportunity both to facilitate sustainability and to further strengthen the universities in the country. It is also not clear from the result if the external partner has the processual capacity and pedagogical know-how to conduct effective training." Step 5, pilot projects without scale-up. The few projects that include some implementation of actual activities other than training are limited to pilot projects without the expected scale-up and follow-up. Donors are funding a pilot project in 2 districts and then they pull out, according to the participants. Scaling up may therefore be problematic if the government is not committed and having the resources. No focus on capacity utilization, step number 6. There is an exclusive focus on creating capacity creation, which means development of skills, establishment of procedures, policies, and regulations, and no focus or activities on supporting the internal partner in utilizing the developed capacity or integrate processes or policies. It was pointed out that actually capacity development is learning by doing. One participant called for some kind of intervention to make sure people are able to make use of it. However, the internal partners is always capacitated and does not have time to sit down, reflect and apply the skills or integrate processes and procedures within the organization. This problem is further exacerbated by the internal partners' full agendas, small units, different priorities, limited and competing resources. Often the project is an add-on and a side project. Capacity may be created in a project, but rarely utilized within the scope of the project and difficult to retain over time. The last step, no focus on retention. The results clearly show that the staff turnover is a huge challenge for all partners. Staff change positions or get an international job. There is also a lack of job security. Staff are not guaranteed permanent positions after the project is over and having to replace staff on a regular basis, which causes loss of or no institutional memory. Capacity retention is also about the regular adaptation of policies, structures, processes, procedures, and regulations and laws, which is rarely considered in capacity development. Capacities are not static, and retaining capacity is as important as creating and utilizing them. The system needs to be flexible and adaptable regarding financing and implementation of the project and activities, depending on the changing situation. Not only the system, but we also need to have flexible and adaptive roles. The results indicate that all 5 roles in the figure are important and needed at different times, in different situations and for different purposes. Important to note, one role is not better than the other. However, it is clear from the results that external partners are still maintaining traditional perspectives and roles, such as being an expert and advisor when engaging in capacity development initiatives. If we look at the roles, the expert undertakes a task and solves a problem oneself, and the advisor helps the internal partner to solve a specified problem with the advisor's knowledge and experience. Both roles have a focus on technical capacities and the implementation of activities, and less focus on the process and the internal partner's growth. These roles are often more in our comfort zone than being a facilitator or coach. There is an expectation management, that the external partner is the expert or advisor. We have the teacher role in the middle, who explain basic principles and skills required to conduct a general task and solve a problem, but is still somewhat focused on the results and implementation of activities. When the external partner takes on the neutral convening role of a facilitator, the focus is even more on the process, but the facilitator is still holding the pen, have the penship, and can do facilitation. When dropping the focus on implementation activities entirely and fully focusing on the growth of the internal partner, the external partner becomes a coach. The coach observes and lets the internal partner conduct the task and solve the problem, while providing suggestions and feedback and discussing the pros and cons with different options and the actual results. The different roles are needed, and sometimes different points in time. It is important we start discussing our roles and how these may evolve over time, as well as our understanding about capacity development. From the result, 3 requisite types of capacities emerge: technical, processual, and contextual. These 3 overall types of capacities interact and are interdependent of each other. Technical capacity is often the focus, as mentioned before. Internal partners expect external partners to have sufficient technical capacity, voicing outright irritation when that is not the case, for example, sending junior staff. Processual capacity here is the capacity to drive a project and organization as a whole, commonly referred as functional capacity and described as organizational and project management skills. Processual capacity is also to facilitate capacity development processes, which is often overlooked and comprise more social and relational capacities and include aspects such as leadership, learning, building equal partnerships and trust, self-reflection, communication, change management, problem solving, negotiation, and relational skills. Finally, contextual capacity is the capacity to understand the local context and the existing capacities and needs, which is often missing. Without contextual understanding, external partners lack the awareness and flexibility needed to effectively support capacity development processes in changing contexts. So, to summarize, we have identified a typology of 7 project failures, more credit to internal partners, explicit opportunities for mutual learning and adaptive roles for partners spanning from expert to coach need to be considered, and 3 requisite and interdependent types of capacities: technical, processual, and contextual. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Magnus. That was very interesting indeed. Just a quick reminder again, any questions or thoughts that you would like to share, please use the World Water Week platform chat function. Our next speaker is Mada S. Penge. He's the managing director of the Guma Valley Water Company, the water utility for Freetown and the Western area in Sierra Leone. He has served in this capacity for nearly 3 years. During this period, he has positioned Guma Valley Water Company to be a more effective service delivery organization by increasing access to water supply and improving revenue collection and customer satisfaction. Mada will be presenting on the reality of institutional capacity development programs and what works and what hasn't. So Mada, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Mada S. Penge, the Managing Director of Guma Valley Water Company, which is a water utility in Sierra Leone. I'm presenting on the topic Institutional Support and Capacity Development Programs, the reality. In other words, how institutions can get the most value out of external interventions. This is a topic under the session Capacity for Governing Water Security Risk and Uncertainty. Let me talk briefly about Sierra Leone. It's a country on the west coast of Africa with a population of 7.1 million people. Sierra Leone is a low-income country with agriculture and mining being the main economic activities. The capital city, Freetown, sits on the Western Area Peninsula, and the peninsula itself has both urban and rural communities. The population on the peninsula is about 1.7 million people. The area of coverage for Guma Valley, the area where the utility is expected to supply water, covers the whole of the peninsula. Freetown has an average rainfall of 4,500 millimeters per year, which is quite high. The photos on the right-hand side of the slide shows some of our facilities. Even though the rainfall is high and the wet rainy season lasts from 4 to 6 months per year, only about 60% of the population on the peninsula have access to safe, clean drinking water supply. Guma Valley has a total production capacity of 85,000 cubic meters per day against an estimated total demand for water supply of 220 cubic meters per day. We have quite a lot of gap to close. The main contributing factors to the low access over the past decades is low capital investments in new water supply infrastructure as the population grew, and the low tariffs. We have one of the lowest tariffs in Africa with only $0.25 per cubic meter or 1,000 liters. We have used 4 indicators to compare the performance of the utility Guma Valley as at 2012 to the average across Africa, and in particular UNIA in Burkina Faso, one of the best performing utilities on the continent. Connectedness, Guma has 1.1 connections per 100 people, low when compared to the average in Africa as at 2017, which is 3, and UNIA at 8.8 at 2014. Collections efficiency was also low at Guma at 53%, with the average across Africa at 91% and UNIA 97%. Staff productivity was low, greater than 20 per 1,000 connections Africa is 5, and UNIA is 3. Non-revenue water was high at 61% for Guma, 17% for UNIA, and 30% across Africa. Again, these were 2012 figures for Guma. As you can see, the utility was in a very difficult place. Salaries and other facilities were not being paid on time. Getting chemicals for water treatment was difficult. Terrible workplace environments were maintained or not maintained, and lack of materials and tools for staff to work. It was during this same year that DFID, the Department for International Development, now FCDO, a UK aid agency, stepped in and decided to help. The initial focus of the intervention was on capacity building, not infrastructure. The world-famous utility management experts 2ML from Uganda were brought in to work directly with the management and staff. Lots of workshops on behavioral change exercises were conducted. An incentive program was launched, amongst many other things. Staff were motivated and were made conscious of the goals of the organization. DFID also funded the purchase of a new billing system, and that is what we are still using. Several development partners have come in to work with us, and their interventions have helped a great deal in helping arrest the decline in services. And we have recorded huge improvements in service delivery as a result of all these interventions. Let me just go down the list of development partners we have worked with over the years. Water and Sanitation Program, WSP of the World Bank, funded in 2014 and 2015 a customer enumeration program for the whole city that helped us discover households that were benefiting from the service but not paying for it. FCDO or DFID came back with the Freetown Water Supply Rehabilitation Program, a 48 million British pound project, which is in its final stages of implementation. With this project, key infrastructure will be rehabilitated. The Millennium Challenge Corporation, an agency of the United States, sponsored the Threshold program, and Guma Valley was a major beneficiary with the institutional strengthening activity. The African Development Bank is funding the Freetown Water Supply Master Plan, which is going on and will provide a roadmap for getting to 100% access for water supply. As well, the African Development Bank and a number of other funding agencies on the continent and in the Middle East are funding the Freetown Wash and Aquatic Environment Revamping Project, a $190 million intervention that has just started. And this project will bring water supply to communities, mainly in the rural part of the peninsula. Development partners have done tremendously well for the utility, and the people of Freetown will benefit from the gains in service improvements. We have also benefited from scholarship programs from universities across the world, in particular IHE Delft, who have sponsored over 8 of our staff to undertake postgraduate master's programs in water treatment and management, and these staff have come back and are now contributing tremendously to the organization. With years of experience working with development partners, there are many aspects of the interventions that worked well and some other aspects that did not work well. Let me highlight a few examples of what worked and what did not work. The behavioral change workshops with full staff participation were empowering. Incentive programs where staff were rewarded for meeting certain levels of performance was great. Twinning arrangements with the Ghana Water Company worked well. Staff traveled to Ghana and were embedded in their operations for periods from 2 to 3 weeks, and they experienced many innovations firsthand. For example, how Ghana Water leveraged technology to increase their collections efficiency and improve their customer response. The aqua rating exercise by IWA was great. The exercise provided knowledge of best practice for utility operations. With the results-based financing project, which targeted institutions not only in the water sector but also in the electricity sector, rewarded institutions for achieving certain set targets. This program saw a drastic increase in staff motivation and delivery. The program provided the much needed cash injection for reducing water wastages. The provision of tools and equipment and improvements in workplace environments improved staff productivity, and of course the postgraduate programs. What did not work were the development of strategies and policies that hardly no one understood and sometimes were poorly implemented or not implemented at all. And the focus of consultants on the delivery of reports and glossy presentations that had little impact on the operation of the utilities. So why did the things that work? Why certain interventions worked and others did not? The main reason we observed was interventions that the staff benefited from directly or were directly involved in worked quite well. So people-centeredness is a key attribute that we observed. In conclusion, local knowledge and context should be leveraged by external partners. Project deliverables should be tangible and in line with service improvements. But recipient institutions should be bold enough to change the direction of their programs if they are not getting much value from the programs in line with their objectives or the objectives of the organizations they work for. This brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mada. That was very insightful, and we can already see from those two presentations some of these conclusions aligning. So now it's time for our presenters to answer some of your questions. And the first one is for Magnus from Dima. She says, contextual capacity is the most important capacity in my opinion, and I agree as well. How can we involve the beneficiaries in the decision making? This is for Magnus.
Thank you for the question, and I agree too. And that's what we noticed, that is often lacking or missing when we work with these initiatives. So how do we evolve? I think we need to have a mindset shift, how we look upon partnership or capacity development, because it is a relationship where we create trust and we work together. We may have different roles in these partnerships that may evolve over time as proxy indicators, but in the very end, I think it's communication is key. Sometimes we assume we understand each other in general, and take the time to have a cup of tea and not always be so result oriented. So in this partnership, it's on equal terms, where you are the local partner, or as I call the internal partner, they are on board from the beginning. So that's one. And if I may say one more, it's actually a system shift, I would say, from a donor perspective. And the system there is very much dominated by control in the aid chain. And that becomes like a cascading effect, that the control is even more down the line in the very end. So there is a need to have some kind of risk sharing so we can avoid that kind of control, I believe. That was a very good question, and it's quite a challenging one to answer. Thank you.
Yes, I definitely agree. And just to follow up, another question for Magnus, and then we'll go with Mada. In capacity development, we normally look at institutional level to determine gaps and what to support less, so on the individuals to make up institutions. You mentioned staff-centered capacity development as a must, as our previous question. Do you think using this approach might help avoid some of the project failures you mentioned? Not, for example, not focuses on utilization, only on ad hoc training, etc.
Thank you, Christina. Could you just rephrase the key question here? Say again, please.
If you think that this approach might help about some of the project failures that you mentioned, having determining the gaps and these assessments at the beginning, when we look at this institutional level capacity development.
Yeah, I mean, where should you start? You could start with, it's complex what we're trying to do, and we're living in a dynamic world. It's not static, so therefore we need to see how things are combined. I would say, if we work with individuals, how do that relate to the organization they work in, and so forth. Whatever we do in the organization, do we have that mandate from institutional level, what we sometimes call the enabling environment? So yes, we know that. Sometimes it doesn't matter what kind of level we talk about, if it's the individual, organizational, or more society, institutional. I think sometimes, as mentioned before, when we develop capacities, are we focusing on creating capacities, which we do quite often? But I think the missing point is actually the implementation. I think Dr. Wasim talked about that, the challenges with the implementation, and that's key. So the utilization part is very important and actually designed for that, as well as the retention, the capacity retention. And to add on that one, and also coming back to Andrew, talking about we need process managers, and I think so. I think we need to be having more of that kind in our projects, and finally, Mada also mentioned that we need to tap into local knowledge and the context, and that is very much what the contextual capacity tries to do. So I think we are all on the same page here, but there is a need with a mindset shift about how this partnership works from the beginning. That's key, but also from the donor side. I work very closely with the Swedish donor, SIDA, and already this article have quite some influence, I could say.
Great, thanks Magnus for that answer. And now we have a question for Mada, and it is, what do you see as the main governance bottlenecks in your experience to make further progress? Mada, if you can unmute yourself.
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you very much. We usually have a very hard time getting our political masters to understand the importance of access to water supply. So, most of what we've done has been completely supported by external donors, but, without government support or without us being at the top of the priority list, that makes it quite difficult for us to achieve some of the big interventions that we want to attract into the sector. In terms of financing some of the big projects, that's a challenge. In terms of getting the government to really put its feet down for protection of the catchments, in our own case, is a big issue. We're always struggling to the catchment being destroyed for housing development and other things, mining, and it's always a fight between us and government officials for them to understand that these environments need to be protected for water supply. So it's quite a challenge. We'll keep fighting.
Yes, that's true. That's true, Mada. Thank you. And for our last question, given our limited time, it's for Mada as well. Sometimes engineers focus on technical aspects instead of the more critical and broader political context. You and both, Magnus, mentioned this lack of recognition of the expertise of the internal partners or recipient institutions, especially in relation to the contextual knowledge. So in your experience, what are ways to get this expertise recognized and appreciated as a keen skill a bit more than just the technical ones?
Yeah, so I mentioned this a bit in the presentation. I think recipient organizations should have a clear understanding of what they want to achieve, and they should be willing to direct the external partners where they want them. I mean, we've had to stop a project. We had a project a couple of years ago that wasn't going in the direction that we wanted. And we called on the donor and said, no, this is not our expectation, you know, and we had to go back to the drawing board and redefine the deliverables for the project. It was a risk because normally you think as a recipient organization, you don't have a voice or you don't have a place on the table to really determine the outcome of the project. But we did, and they listened, and you know the outcome was good.
Great, thank you, Mada. And now we will be transitioning to our next section of our agenda, and we will be joining some breakout groups for some interesting discussions based on our presentations that we've heard and seen. And I will give it the floor to Damien, who will be explaining a bit about this exercise.
Thanks very much, Christina. So before starting the groups, I will give the voice to Maria. So she's going to present some basic guidelines before we jump into the groups. Maria, if you may.
Hi, everyone. We're going to take a 5-minute tea break before we start the breakout sessions. So if everyone can be back at 2:20 CEST, we'll start the presentation in the breakout rooms then. Hi, and welcome back, everyone. I hope you had enough time to stretch your legs and get a cup of tea. This is just a short presentation to explain the format of the breakout rooms. So there's going to be 4 questions discussed. Each room will discuss 1 question in detail. Everybody will be randomly assigned a room and it will last for 20 minutes. The chat function within Zoom is turned off, and if there's any questions, there's an ask for help button on the bottom of your screen. You can click. We're going to use Padlet for the breakout rooms. So you can open up Padlet right now by clicking the link in the chat box on the World Water Week platform. Once you enter the rooms, I suggest to say hi, do an icebreaker, a round of introductions to get to know each other. Go to the box on Padlet with the same number as your breakout room number. So if you're in breakout room number 1, go to the Padlet titled room 1. You can decide who's going to take notes on Padlet, and then it's time for discussion. So reflect and discuss on the information that has been presented so far, along with your own experiences. There's a question posed in the Padlet to begin discussions, but feel free to let the conversations flow as you are the experts. Try to note down 4 conclusions in the group discussions. So this is just a few instructions on how to use Padlet. So once you open it, you will see 3 dots on the upper right-hand corner. If you click on that and then select Edit Post, a box will appear where you can write down your conclusions. And if you write down your conclusions underneath the yellow highlighted text, once you're completed, you can click Update for it to be saved. Happy discussions. Now just give me 10 seconds and the breakout rooms will start. Hello, can you hear me? Adiba.
Hi. Oh, she just left. Okay. You're moving people to the rooms, right, Maria?
Yeah, and then if there's a room which doesn't have you or Hukan or Lawton, I'd go and check. But I think every room has someone in there now, so I think everyone.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, Maria, can you hear me? Are you there? Okay, super, super, yeah. I just wonder because I was in a group now. I think it was a little bit not clear to some of the participants what they should do.
Maybe Hukan, I'll call you on WhatsApp because this is being recorded.
Okay,
Yes,
sure,
please.
sure. Yeah, yeah, super.
Okay, thank you all very much. We are back from the groups. I know it was short, but for me, I managed to jump into a couple of different groups. But by the way, let me start by introducing myself. I'm Damian Indig. I'm part of Cabinet UNDP, and I will try now to make some summary of the different inputs that you all shared in the groups. So as I was saying, I managed to jump into a couple of groups, and at the same time, I'm working here with two screens, and I could see what you managed to write down on the Padlet. So thanks for that. So there were different groups, and groups had different questions. So first, I will share with all of you the different questions, so you all have an idea of what happened, and then some reflections and some summary on that. So one question was, what capacities do we struggle with in the water sector, and what capacities do we do well? So very wide, very open question, but important to take some minutes and say, okay, we're doing well in this, we're not doing not so well in that. Then the other question was, within the water sector, what do you think are the priority capacities needed to adapt to uncertainty? That's the topic. And in one of the groups already, there was a very interesting comment in saying, okay, let's agree on what we understand by uncertainty. And that's in itself a very interesting discussion, which we should all take forward. And if that's a message from today saying, okay, let's really dig into this word uncertainty. What does it mean? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for us in terms of people leading and guiding capacity development? And then the other question was, what do you think are the main elements for successful capacity development? So there was a sort of an editorial line in these questions, as you can see. And one of the first conclusions or summary points I get from visiting the groups is it's a very powerful message. Imagine if we in our organizations, in our institutions, if we could really take some time and think strategically about capacity development, and for a moment sort of put a break on the inertia of doing things as usual, doing business as usual, as it's sometimes mentioned now in terms of capacity development. What if we could keep in mind the most frequent failures in capacity development, as Magnus presented very well before the break, and say, okay, listen, we have been doing capacity development for very long time, but even if we looked at the last 30 years, and I'm using 30 years because next year it's going to be 30 years since the Dublin Principles, 1992, and the IWRM Principles. So what if we put those 30 years and say, okay, we have been doing capacity development like this. We now understand these failures, and we really need to think about capacity development strategically. Maybe I could say again, but what if we did that? So this exercises that you just done for 15 minutes, what if we did that for a serious period of time? What if we really do it organically in our institutions, and what would be the results, and which are the things which we could shift if we actually did this, instead of sort of repeating and going over again over the same failures? So some of the answers that we got. So what are the things we're doing well? So in group number 1, including gender, age, sectors in decision making, I think we can all agree that there's a very important trend in that direction. Still lots of things to improve and to be done, but at least for the persons involved, we could see that there's a path and there's a progress in that. Technical skills, there's a need for clear definition of responsibilities, role, and coordination. So again, we face that coordination. And also, I'm going to allow myself to connect that with also what Magnus mentioned about the lack of focus on the utilization of capacity and the lack of focus on the retention of capacity. We just look at ad hoc delivery, and we don't really have a system approach, a whole approach. Then in many groups, I can see the word planning again, and that's not a surprise. But then if we connect the need for planning with other things which were mentioned in the session today, like the contextual and the process and the utilization, we see that in theory, in understanding, there are some very important agreements, even in the frameworks. But if we go to the practice, we see that in implementation, we are still way behind. So planning is definitely something that we need to work on, integrate local governments, again, inclusion of multiple stakeholders. And then a very important point, thanks in room number 2.3, the behavioral change approaches, and the need also to connect that with some other issues which were mentioned here and there today, monitoring, evaluation, indicators, self-assessment, theory of change. All those keywords I may connect now in this summary with the relevance of you guys incorporating in room 2 the notion of behavioral change. In group number 3, what do we do well? Again, we do well ad hoc activities. That's it's good to say that, but maybe the question is, okay, what we have been doing for the last decades, we really do well, but perhaps we need a paradigm shift. Perhaps we need a strategic renovation and do things a little bit different. So the things we have been doing, we do them right, but maybe there are further needs, and that puts ourselves in the challenge to think things differently. We do well in building infrastructure, but not so much in maintaining. I guess our colleagues working perhaps on integrity have a lot to say about that. We do well in planning here, but we struggle in implementing the full plan. So again, in our minds, we see the picture, but we are not really able to take it down. And again, the participation of the communities. Group number 4, again, needs assessment. So of course, if we want to have some change and behavioral change, and we want to understand how to promote the utilization, the retention, then definitely we need some needs assessments. Finance, of course. This requires finance, it requires an investment. Again, the communities, again, the process, the outcomes. So a very clear line of continuity instead of ad hoc activities, which we deliver day 1, we finish in day 5, and that's it. And also perhaps I'm going to add now the notion of treating capacity development as one component of our program, instead of seeing it as a cross-cutting learning process and making that all the development programs become learning knowledgeable programs on their own, instead of saying, okay, well, the last component of the program is capacity development. And as many of us know, then if the program is lucky, then some activities, ad hoc activities, are delivered. But that really explains that we don't see too much changes on the ground. Group number 5, we do well in education and training programs, and like the experience in the recent years in Afghanistan. And again, group number 5 and group number 6 have some things in common, which is the mentioning we find now the data, the relevance of data, data availability, and the idea of taking decisions based on scientific data. So that's a complete area. If I connect that with uncertainty and with the context of climate change, then definitely data availability and access to the right type of information, and using the tools that we now have and we didn't have 10 or 20 years ago, and the connectivity, then that's a huge area of capacity development. Data accessibility, data management, and then some water issues. So that was my summary. So I don't know if there are some questions on the chat. I don't see any questions, but I can invite now my colleagues who are giving a hand in different groups. If someone wants to add something, either any of the co-hosts of the session or any of the participants, we have some minutes left. Let me see.
You share the results of these discussion groups?
I think, well, the session is going to be recorded, but I think also this Padlet, this findings will also be available somewhere.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
If you go to the chat function in the World Water Week platform, Pathable, you're gonna see right now the link up above in the chat. So you can access to all the results of the breakout rooms.
Okay, then I see still no questions. For me, I still have a couple of minutes. So for me, the main message, I think the value here were the questions themselves. They could look wide open questions, as I said before, but I've been working on water capacity development for 20 plus years now. And really what I miss is to see in the water sector a very serious and deep discussion about capacity development. I'm lucky to be working in a capacity development program on itself, so that's our daily business. But in general, I still see this sort of consideration of capacity development as something that you do on the side, you do at the very end of the projects. It's component number 5. When the project is about to come to an end, suddenly people, they see an alarm, a red light saying, oh, we didn't do capacity development. We need to do something quick because we need to report on that and then close the program. And if I connect the dots and I connect all your comments on the previous session, it's clearly a need for a systematic approach, a sort of a whole program approach where learning doesn't stay at the end, like, the last cookie of the tar, but it's something where we can build knowledge along the process, as it was mentioned, and we can ensure that we are responding to demands that we know, that we are responding to a context that is known, and that we're doing a program in which capacities will be utilized. Otherwise, we are sort of repeating ourselves and not making any advantage of this vast experience. So with this, I would like to thank you all for the groups. We know that always participating in these groups in workshops, it's a bit of a challenge and the time is short, but the idea, if this could raise some questions for you and sort of give you the opportunity to keep these things in mind and hopefully then share it with your colleagues in other opportunities, then that would be a very positive outcome of this very short exercise. And with this, I'm going to give the word now back to Håkan Trup from SIWI, and he will guide you into a very interesting roundtable that we have next. Håkan, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Damian, and lots of thanks also to the different breakout group participants. Indeed, very insightful reflections. In the beginning, I mentioned that we do work on this program called Go Water, which is very much focusing on enhancing governance as a means of then improving water security. So of course we will really try to learn as much as we can from this session, and also to see what we can bring into this program and what makes sense. I think so far, we've heard a lot on also what we need to do, what do we need to build capacities on, and of course how we need to do it. And I think this is something we will continue to discuss and debate and provide more insights on as we now move over to a very interesting panel debate. I think it's fair to say that water is a complex policy area or even a political, socioeconomic area, and of course with huge impacts on society in different ways, providing different types of social and economic benefits, but of course also negative sides of having too much water or too little water or too dirty water, for example. It's also clear that we need to respond in multiple ways to where we need to build capacities. So it's of course really about technical aspects, more infrastructure development aspects, also financing and governance, and also slicing it in a different way. It's also about building process capacities as well as contextual capacities. Something I also very much liked, which came out from the discussions now, and Damian was referring to it, is about how we talk about these things, the semantics. So I think also there it's really useful to continue discussions, debates. Can we reach also a basic common understanding on certain concepts we're using, for example, like uncertainty, like adaptive management, governance, security. So I think as professionals in the sector, we tend to use a little bit too much jargon at times. So I think it can be useful to reflect on that and the semantics and how we talk about these issues. I think now basically the last half an hour here, I mean, we are entering into, I think, a very exciting element of this session. And it's a panel discussion. We have 5 very distinguished panelists that will guide us here on these matters. So we have Leon Hermans working as an associate professor, IHE Delft. We have Dina Ravaka, she is a youth representative at the Global Water Partnership, Southern Africa. We have Alyssa Ofut, and she's the coordinator youth for the Rhine River, and also a PhD student. We also have with us Khalid Hazabala, and Khalid, he's leading the capacity development unit within the Ministry of Irrigation and Water Resources in Sudan. And then finally, also Mr. Temba Gumbo, who is leading the UNDP's network for capacity development, CAPNet. I think over to you first, Leon. I mean, it really seems like, I think also based on the discussions here, the capacity development in water governance, also related to adaptive management, could also be integrated water resources management, actually seem to receive much less attention and resources when it comes to investing in capacity development. And maybe then where some technical areas linked to infrastructure, etc., may receive a bit more. As well as we don't necessarily integrate capacity development as a natural part on how we are progressing as organizations. So from your experience, Leon, how can learning and capacity development monitoring and iteration be much better reflected and valued in policy and governance processes? Over to you, Leon.
Yeah, thank you, Hakan. Yeah, one issue is of course on the capacity development and how can we boost that. And I am happy to notice that at least in our session and in the speeches that came out, also some of the keynotes, it was noticed that building the capacity of individuals, of individual staff, Southern-led, actually is one of the most worthwhile development interventions. So maybe that helps to get the message across. But if I've also been thinking a bit about developing capacity to make sure that we do monitor and learn and iterate, which is a slightly different thing, of course, but well needed for adaptive governance, because if we don't know what we are actually doing, how well we are doing it, and if it is still fit for the dynamic and the changing environments that we are in, then of course we also don't know if we need to adapt anything and how to adapt. And I think that issue of monitoring and learning and iterating in our policy and governance, I think that requires us to develop capacities on three main items. One, I think, is the mindsets. Behavioral change has been mentioned, but I would say mindsets. The second is the methods, and the third is the institutions and the enabling environments. And if we start with the mindsets, I think one important change in mindset that we need is to accept and expect failure rather than to focus and expect success. And of course, that does mean sort of smart failure. So it does not mean incompetence or repeating unnecessary failures, but it does mean accepting and expecting failures. Second is methods. I feel we lack methods and a sufficiently widespread knowledge of even basic methods for monitoring and evaluation. And we need methods beyond the theory of change to deal with complexity and the multiple actors and sectors that are nowadays involved. And third is the institutions and the enabling environment. I think we have many platforms and units and institutions that do help us to learn. This whole conference, this whole Stockholm Water Week is one of a larger ecosystem, but I do think we need a better understanding of that ecosystem and to consider if the current setup of that institutional ecosystem is still fit for the 21st century. So mindsets, methods, and institutions, I'd say.
Sounds very good, Leon. I think it's very interesting what you're pointing to, and I think we are not good at doing this. That is both to expect and accept failure and how we learn from it and how we move forward. And I think we can all say and be fair that we all do it, we all fail in different ways, but we don't really learn from it in the way as we could do. Thanks a lot. Dina, I think also in your capacity as being a youth representative, I think that could also give you some very interesting perspectives on how you would see on water governance and what you would see as the most critical or important aspects to work with for improved water security. So how do you see that, Dina? Over to you.
Thank you, Hakan. So I would like to attempt to answer this question by talking about a very concrete case of water insecurity and uncertainty here in Madagascar. Indeed, we are facing a very scary situation in the south of the island where we have a continuous and devastating drought due mostly to climate change and human unsustainable activities, especially in rural areas. Not so long ago in July, the World Food Programme made this short documentary which alarmed the world on the daily consequences of the climate change crisis, where entire communities in southern Madagascar are facing starvation due to the back-to-back drought and desertification. This phenomenon is sadly not new for us here. We have a name for it. We call it kere. So today, when talking about the most critical governance aspects to work with for improved water security, we need to see the bigger picture, yet we have to implement community-based solutions due to climate change. And we've talked about it during the keynotes and also during the conversations that we had. What we mean by uncertainty. Here in Madagascar, we think the uncertainty is climate change, and it is very certain. Even if we build the infrastructures,
we are not sure we will still have water in the near future. So the thing is, to carry a big group of individuals is obliged to migrate in other parts of the islands where the problem remains the same. There is a vicious cycle of not having enough water, not having enough food, and having to go in the forest and even in protected areas where the biodiversity is in danger to find something to eat. So again, I think the most critical governance aspect is to go to the basic needs of the population and work on the theories of change and try to plan a nexus which integrates water, food, education, etc. So I'd like to end my contribution here, and I'm open to more discussions to find together the best solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dina, for that. Really interesting when you're saying that for you in Madagascar, the uncertain is in many cases already certain. That's and I think it's linked to the whole discussion on uncertainty. Certainty. There's of course also discussion on risk willingness, the risk behavior, risk propensity of different types of actors, even countries as one actor. So I think that, of course, is also part of the uncertainty discussion. So thank you so much for that, Dina. Alyssa, over to you. I think we've heard quite a lot this session about adaptive management, and it seems to me a very sound type of concept. There are some methodologies developed around it. Still, of course, there are several challenges on how to implement adaptive management, the capacity needed, how we invest in that, etc., etc. But what would you see? And I think also in your capacity of coordinating youth for the River Rhine, and what you would see as the next generation of capacity development to meet the challenges of adaptive management. And I think we're probably the Netherlands, and where you come from, is a very good example, working already on adaptive management and in different ways to adapt to changing hydrological conditions. So how would you see this, Alyssa?
Thank you for the question. And I think when we're talking about what's required in capacity development for adaptive management, I think it very nicely parallels what we want to see in capacity development in general. So as you mentioned, there's been a lot of discussion on it today and a lot of good ideas, including systematic approaches that are context sensitive. And one point that I'd really like to reiterate for adaptive management is something that was brought up in the discussion by most of the groups, which is inclusion of stakeholder perspectives. Because as water resources change and become more unpredictable, we'll also see that unpredictability in water-related needs, impacts, and human responses. And the only way that we can really rapidly and effectively respond to this is to have the inclusion of stakeholder perspectives. So I would argue that the next generation of capacity development needs to focus on creating these spaces for inclusion with decision makers in the planning, implementation, and monitoring of any water management. And then maybe something we haven't discussed yet, but that the capacity development should also enable more bottom-up approaches by engaging with a wider range of stakeholders. And so this can help to facilitate the exchange of information between stakeholders and decision makers, and also can support monitoring water resources on a broader scope in real time through citizen science initiatives. And two other components I would argue when we are doing this broader stakeholder engagement and capacity development is that they should be designed to be accessible to particular stakeholder groups. So as mentioned before, the importance of context and communication. And I think this is something I want to reiterate when we are doing capacity development. For instance, in Youth for the Rhine, we're hoping to engage with youth under the age of 12. And we want to do this through art initiatives, as opposed to more traditional methods like surveys that we use with older participants. The second thing I think is important in any capacity development, and especially in regards to adaptive capacity, is the importance of network building that can occur during capacity development activities. And that by including a wider geographic distribution of stakeholders where possible, we're able to support relationship building that can then enable things like informal data exchange that can relate in real-time responses to changes as they occur. And as well can support cooperation amongst different administrative entities, such as through track 3 diplomacy, and helping create that broader collaboration of citizens. So I think that by having these inclusive approaches, we can not only support capacity development, but then it can also benefit our adaptive management on all levels of scale.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. I think you point to some very interesting areas. I mean, you mentioned inclusion of stakeholders, working very much from bottom up. I think really these are some of the modalities for working with adaptive management. I think as we move into a more uncertain water future, most likely stakeholder negotiation will be one type of measure, for example, that will increase in importance, and hence inclusion, bottom up, participatory approaches will of course be very important. I also like your reference there to working more with real-time data, for example. I mean, the whole issue of digitalization and what it means for water is of course extremely important. Not only for measuring water flows, but also how it can be used for improving water governance. How can we use blockchain technology, for example, to increase the integrity of certain water transactions, for example, just as one example. Thank you so much, Alyssa. I think also, and this has been referred to throughout the session, that one type of capacity we need to build more of is the one on creating sustainable business models, including mobilization of financing in different ways. And my question to you, Khalid, and Khalid, I think he is really the practitioner here and leading the capacity development department within his own ministry. I mean, how do you see investment in governance and capacity development being boosted? What can you do as a country or as a ministry to try to boost different types of investments in capacity development? Over to you, Khalid. I think you're still on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, thank you very much, Håkan. Yeah, of course, governance system and institutional capacity development are at the heart of the decision making that guides how resources are used to achieve the inclusive outcomes of any institutions. And with no doubt that institutional capacity development and leadership forms the foundation of how visions, policies, strategies are translated into actions and outcomes that really impacted positively our communities. Therefore, I think more investment in institutional capacity and leadership skills, and that's what we are doing here in Sudan. That will really push and ensure good governance to promote and enforce policies that address the actual needs in capacity development. Of course, that must be built on critical training need assessment. Another issue is that the importance of element of good governance include transparency and accountability. And this is very important to enhance the trust between the government and the various stakeholders working in the water sector. Also, one of the main issues is that the sector coordination, and this has been mentioned by many speakers during the discussion and the session. So it's very important that we have a good sector coordinations and good communication, which can really help in interactive and collaborative environment among the various sectors. So therefore, defining a clear roles and responsibilities for each partner is very essential. Also in governance process, I think the attitude and behavior of decision makers and professional staff are also important. Therefore, building the capacity on attitude shift and positive change I think is very, very important, especially in a country that facing like a transitional period like Sudan. Finally, I think also in capacity building, it's very, very important also to move from ad hoc type of training to a well-structured training, such like career ladder. And this is also, I think, mentioned by Magnus during his presentation. So it's very important to move from ad hoc to a well-structured type of training and capacity building. And finally, I think also one of the main issues is the financial support for training and education. And this is one of the key issues that I think we need to work hard to secure some funding for education and capacity development, and also for applied research that gives some of the young people the chance or the ability to collaborate in joint research between the Sudanese institution and other institutions from outside the country. Thank you very much, and back to you, Hakan.
Thank you so much, Khalid. And indeed, I mean, you're referring to many challenges there, and I think also many needs when it comes to doing proper assessments of what's actually needed. I think also pointing to the need for the really long-term planning of capacity development and coming away from this ad hoc approach. Temba, I think, and I think we saw this in the maybe partly in the presentation by Dr. Iqbal, and working on water governance in Afghanistan as one example, that there's actually a lot of adaptive capacities in many developing countries. And I think countries are really adapting as they go along. And of course, that adaptive measures may look very different from country to country. In your experience, Temba, I mean, you have worked with capacity development for a long time in many emerging economies and also developing economies. And what strengthens and what are the experience do fragile countries have that may be useful in adapting to water future stresses?
Thank you, Hakan. Thank you, everyone. Maybe to just kick off, I'll say, in short, fragility is synonymous with low capacity and high aid dependency. That's one of the main characteristics. So if I put it bluntly, you might say, it's linked to some kind of hopelessness. But at the same time, as your question is crafted, we see that fragile states or developing states, they do exhibit some key strengths and experiences which may be useful in adapting to future stresses. I'll do this by giving you two illustrative examples. The first example is the capacity on self-organization, especially in the informal sense, because most of the states or countries we are referring to, most of the formal systems would have collapsed. If I pick up a country like Bangladesh, where you can see a coastal community. By the way, I looked at the statistics of the Fragile States Index, and Bangladesh is number 39 out of 179. We can debate that index maybe later. But you'll see that the Bangladeshis have managed to also improve their absorptive capacity to build barriers that will protect their resources against annual flooding. And also their adaptive skills to alter how they cultivate crops and also collect drinking water, new ways to guard against the increasing salinity of groundwater and also associated with the climate change. So these are just simple examples where we see that also looking at different stakeholders, including women, different community groups, this has led to some improvements. So this is an example of Bangladesh, where self-organization is very important. The second example which I want to give is the one on openness to learning and innovation. Most developing and fragile states have an openness to this. If I pick up on Somalia, for example, which is, by the way, fragile state index of 2 out of 179, you see that they've embraced innovation, and also have invested a lot in that country in terms of maybe mobile phone technology and other digital platforms, which can be used maybe to support access to online learning. The other thing also still on Somalia, you might find that fragile states at times they can use minimal resources to kickstart certain programs, which can be planting the seed to a much bigger program. Somalia has recently launched its national water strategy, and it has reached out to institutions like us, CAPNet, and also WaterNet, to assist them in developing a curriculum for a master's program in moving forward. So these are baby steps. It's because also they are showing the signs now that they are open, they want to innovate, and they also want to learn. And with that example, it will grow. I know, it takes time. Our business normally takes time. It's anticipated at times that it's a 20 to 40 year gap. But the point which I want to make is you have to start somewhere, and we should not shy away from the so-called fragile states and pick on the ones which are more attractive, if I might use that word. So I'll stop here, Håkan.
Thanks a lot, Temba, for those wise words. And I think you're absolutely right. It's really about building on what's already existing. And I really like the examples there on the strengths of self-organization, that there's a lot of resilience in societies, and also this openness to learning and innovation. I had really hoped that we could also entertain some questions. Actually, we are more or less being kicked out in a few minutes from this meeting space. So first of all, I would like to thank this panel for extremely insightful observations and for sharing your experiences. And I will also thank all the other presenters and also the different colleagues here who have made a lot of preparations for this workshop to happen. There will be a recording of the session, so it will be on this World Water Week platform very shortly. We will also see how maybe we can put it on YouTube, and maybe some other platforms where we can put it. There will be a link to the breakout rooms uploaded also onto the World Water Week platform. In a few days, we will have a summary of the session, which will also be on the World Water Week platform. So we will really try to take all the interventions into account into the conclusions of this session. Please also check out, and these you can find under the polls. There are 3 exit polls on the World Water Week platform. So it's a bit on having your feedback on this session and also generally on the week and how this works. So it's really great if you can fill that in. That will help us to improve for the future. I think finally, thanking all the participants for a really great session filled with learning to be continued, rest assured. There are still a lot of things to be discussed and debated here. I'm also would like to thank my colleague Maria Dillon. She has been kind of lurking around in the shadows here, but she has been leading the coordination on most of the work for this workshop to happen. Also thanking other colleagues and partners from CV, IHE Delft and CapNet that made this session happen. I hope we meet soon again for continued discussions and actions for capacities to reassure better water security. Thank you so much and see you. Bye.